Fire Mountain Aria, written and narrated by Jill Penrod. Chapter 23. I'd not understood the truth of Echo's words to me until I watched Trace deal with the villa colony that afternoon. His focus was a mess. Fear and anger and melancholy and a host of things I couldn't quite describe. And yet he got on the radio and spoke calmly and politely to a man who did not, under any circumstances, want to evacuate his villa colony. "We're running tests," Trace said in a remarkably kind voice, although I sure didn't feel any kindness in his focus. "We'll let you know what we find. Also, this isn't deep. You're welcome to run scans of your own. We'll stick around until the tests are run, and then we'll go, since if you're not evacuating, you don't need our help. I'm glad we were here to help with the rescues. I'm sorry we couldn't help more with the Morrisol leak, but it doesn't seem a fix that needs an eldsinger's touch." I worked hard not to smile at his tone, which just barely slid over the line into irony and sarcasm. Then he turned off the radio and leaned back on the sofa, where we'd settled for this conversation. "They're all so stubborn," he grumbled. "Katie wouldn't stick around if her reef was in danger." "She's new to leadership, but she cares. She honestly worries about her people. And she trusts eldsingers. Considering that she can't sing, and she's surrounded by focus singers who can't even jump from place to place, she's remarkably trusting of eldsingers." "I think she trusts you and Echo," I said. "Katie might look past labels and see the people behind them, the way the Scavari and the Fleota rarely do. We classify the others simply as others and don't get to know them. Gianni was similar to me my entire life, and I didn't know it. There are 500 people on Montefallo, and we should have known about one another." Trace gave me a long look that ended in a smile. "Yes, I've been guilty of the same thing, defining people by singing strength first, sometimes by their wit and their mind, and not the whole person." He relaxed his head against the seat, and his eyes lost focus, which meant he was using his focal sense to classify the world around him. "Echo found something. Not good news, either." "No," I said. I felt it too, the distress in her focus. "Should we go back in there?" He shrugged. "The bad news will still be bad news a few randoms from now. It's not urgent. You'll know if it's urgent. Echo has a very dramatic sense of urgency." I laughed because he was smiling as he said it, his eyes twinkling. He loved his sister. Sometimes that was the strongest thing I felt from him, a focal variation I'd quickly determined was love. Trace felt it to a lesser degree for Gianni and me, which surprised me. Gianni felt a much lesser variation of it for all of us, and Echo was the most reserved. She held us in high regard, I thought, and she loved Trace without reservation, but she held back from us. That made sense. We were strangers, and our presence had greatly altered her world. Not that their presence hadn't altered ours. I didn't know if I would ever get over the shock of discovering nothing in my life was as it seemed. Eventually Trace pushed to his feet, and we returned to the deck, where G stood over one set of equipment while Echo stood across the room. "Okay," she said, "here's what we know. There's a core lava vein that runs through this entire range, and here, and in another spot half a cycler north, it's near the surface. This sensor says it will come through in a matter of days if things remain as they are. The good news is it's a wide area set to breach and not a single spot, so it won't have a force of a full cone. Bad news is the villa colony may feel the current. They might get a lot of heat. They need to evacuate, but we have days and not randoms, and if they don't move, they might still survive." "They don't want to evacuate," Trace said. "I offered to help, but I told them the offer's only on the table until the scans run. Are the scans finished?" Echo tilted her head at her brother, and G sent me a smile, always finding the sibling dynamic amusing. For all their love for each other, they also teased and picked at each other non-stop. "I assume you'll give them a little time after looking at the scans." "Of course I will. but I'm not going to beg anyone to do anything." She nodded. "I'll send the data and see what they say. You want to head back that way?" "I sure don't want to stay here," he said. "Sitting over an imminent core breach isn't how I like to spend my days." She left, and Trace maneuvered the skipper back toward the villa colony. "I got a reply," Echo said a few randoms later. "They don't want to evacuate, but they agreed to do it anyway. They said they can do it without us. It's a small colony, and they have enough vessels to get everyone out." "Where will they go?" Trace asked. "There are no reefs close by," Echo said. "We're too shallow for reefs. But they trade with 2 colonies, each half a day away, so they'll go there." "Which direction?" Trace asked. "You think there's that much danger?" Echo asked. "I don't know. I threatened to walk away, but I'm not sure it's wise to walk away. If their destination is half a day away, we can get them there much faster. 1 or 2 jumps per ship." "If you want to offer, go ahead," Echo said. "I didn't know. I didn't know how hard to push my offer. You can do it? You're okay?" I knew from his focus that the question embarrassed him, and he didn't look at G or me when he answered. "I'm okay. They need to pack. The sensors say they should have another few days, so they won't leave until tomorrow. Do you want to offer our help again? You know I'm willing." He shrugged. "I'll offer." Again, the words didn't line up with the feelings. He said it like it didn't matter, but it mattered. His focus was so lively with conflicting, varying vibrations and waves that it almost hurt my head. To me, that said this mattered very, very much. "When we're done with this, and we're heading back to the Jonathan, I'll teach you new songs," he said. "Anything in particular you want to learn first?" "Jumping people," Gianni said. "We can move rocks, but I noticed the song for people is different." "It is," Trace said, "but close enough that it's easy to learn. I'll teach you all the songs about navigation and sea vessels. Land vessels, too. Then the simple ones like making a fire. Focus singers can do that. Some of them can jump objects of varying sizes. Most can't jump a person or a vehicle. They can search, and we'll learn that. How to read the world around you in a focal search." "Healing for Kaya," Echo said. "Well, both of them should know the songs, but I think Kaya will be more proficient than the rest of us." Gianni laughed. "You gave me quite a look when you said that. Are you afraid my feelings will be injured if I can't heal? Or do you quail at the thought of me trying to heal with a song?" Echo blushed, and Trace grinned at her. "I think I worry about hurting your feelings. You're like Trace, and both of you will do the power jobs, and you'll do them amazingly, frighteningly well." "I'm not that easily hurt," G said with a shrug. "I might have to go back to my reef and barely use these skills. I want to know everything, but I might lose everything too." "You think you can't play if you're back at Montefiore?" Echo asked. "The reeds work there, so why would you not use them?" "Being different is difficult," G said. "To be that different from my people? I might as well live in a glass jar as try to be so different. No, if I have to go back, I'll try to blend in a little more. My eyes make that nearly impossible, but if the eye issue is joined by eldsinger skills, no, I can't live like that." "And yet you could live without using this skill again?" I asked. My heart ached for him. Gianni was strong and powerful and sometimes so broken that his heart hurt mine. I wanted him to belong, to thrive, to sing the reeds and live into this new part of himself. I knew it was what he wanted too. "I think living a life that isn't what I want is more natural to me than any of this," he said quietly, looking at his hands. He sighed, and I knew he hadn't meant to say the words. I also knew he was among friends who would understand and support whatever he had to do. Both of us were, for the first time in our lives. The thought took my breath away. Trace found his voice first after this admission, and he retreated to contact the villa again. Echo sat down and rested against the sofa, much as her brother had done. "I hate that we brought them bad news," she said. You might have saved their lives, Gianni said, sounding surprised. Trust me, they remember the bad news as long as anything. I hope the eruption isn't bad. I hope their homes survive. Can the homes not be moved? I asked. They didn't look that much bigger than some of the vehicles. Technically, yes, we can move homes. But they're built to remain tethered. With enough time to prepare, they could untether and prepare their homes for transport, and Trace and I could move them. We've done it before. But we don't have that kind of time, and it's difficult. It takes all the energy we have to move that kind of mass. Except now there are 4 of us, Gianni said quietly. Right, Echo said. Her focus shifted in some way I couldn't interpret. Anyway, this time nobody is talking about moving whole villas. I do hope they let us send them far away, but I don't know if that will happen. Trace can charm when he wishes, but for a while now, he hasn't wanted to bother. Gianni grinned at me. I'd say on Montefallo, he did a good job of charming. Amma was deeply charmed. Fidelio relaxed once or twice in the midst of all the newness, and Kaya here... He simply smiled at me, and it warmed me. It was a blessing of sorts. He saw that I found Trace interesting, that I was attracted, and he was okay with that. Since I also found Gianni attractive and wasn't sure what to do with my feelings for either man, it helped to know I wasn't in the midst of some kind of competition. I had so few dealings with people, let alone men, that I didn't know what to do with such thoughts. Yes, I thought you both looked a little charmed, Echo said, her focus vibrating with happiness. Finding you has been the best thing to happen to us in a long time. As long as we can save your home. Losing that reef will devastate him. Not both of you? Gianni asked. Echo shrugged. Trace doesn't always think like a team player. He takes defeat personally, even if it's not his fault. I think I do that, I said. Not quite the same, but when I was alone on Montefallo, I somehow thought I deserved it. I was different, and they had the right not to know how to be with me. Kaya, Gianni scolded. I know, I said. Here I'm useful, and my feelings there make less sense to me now. But I understand seeing things wrong and taking blame for no reason. The villa colony wasn't sure about accepting help, so they decided to send a team to run tests on the mountain themselves, and Echo suggested we stay close overnight. I wasn't sure why she was so fearful of letting this colony take care of itself, but she didn't want to leave until we'd done all we could. That evening, Trace settled us in the living area and taught us some basic searches. He told us how to read other singers from a distance, how to judge singing strength, and how to move our foci over long distances quickly while feeling things along the way. We weren't far from the villas, so he used them as our lessons. Echo didn't like the idea, but she admitted we needed to know, and she said since most of the colony was such low-strength focus singers, they would never know we'd searched them. And yet that doesn't matter most of the time, Trace said with a grin. I can't believe you're letting me search the colony without their permission. She shrugged. They need to know. Gianni pointed out we are currently 4 instead of 2. We have a lot more strength now, and we should know how to use it. The colony happens to have the only people around, so let's just use them. She gave a huff, indicating we needed to get on with this before she changed her mind, and Trace led us through many songs that evening. I was amazed. I thought I could feel Trace and G and Echo clearly with my focus alone, but the search song was different. A singer's focus nearly lit up under the song, bright and alive with patterns of energy I had no vocabulary to explain. Trace and Echo gave me a few words, like frequency and wave patterns, but the words needed more poetry. Foci were glittering with power, unique like spiderwebs on a dewy morning. Each one glowed with its own potential, its own variance on emotions, its own speeds and shifts. When I tried to tell them what I felt, using my own inadequate words, Trace raised his eyebrows at Echo. Definitely the heart of a healer, he said. Our mother was a singing healer. She would have loved every word you just said. Sometimes, Trace took a deep breath as a cold, dark wash of grief shifted the pattern of his focus. Sometimes I felt so inadequate. I didn't see the poetry the way she did. She made me feel like I had no heart. Echo shook her head and then hugged him. You have plenty of poetry. You happen to be capable of both, little brother. You have compassion, but also a good dose of logical wisdom. Mother would be proud of you. You know that. She would also approve of the two of you, he said, shooting a sad smile at me. She always imagined more of us, other eldsinger families working to help people across Portomare. Why eldsinger? Gianni asked suddenly. And folk-singer? Where do the words come from? Fire, Trace said. In some old language, eldsinger suggests a singer with fire. And folk-singer isn't flattering, although they don't take offense at it. It comes from another old word meaning fog or blur. The folk-singers don't sense with the clarity we do. Gianni nodded. Thank you, and I apologize. Right in the middle of your talk of your mother, that question popped into my head. Echo laughed. My dad would approve of you, Gianni. Mother was more emotional, and Dad was more logical. Trace here managed to get strength from both sides of his parentage. And you didn't? Gianni asked. You two are not as different as you think. You both filter things through a lot of heart and a lot of wisdom. I smiled at Gianni, who rolled his eyes. I'm not sure I sound like myself anymore, he admitted. I think, I said, that this is the first time either of us has understood ourselves. I think we're seeing our true selves for the first time. Gianni nodded, his focus calm and relaxed. All of them felt calm and relaxed tonight. Even Trace, whose focus had hurt earlier in the day, was now nearly at his normal calm. And that's when the breach blew. Our equipment had been wrong, but so had the colony equipment. With a wild shimmy, the skipper buckled forward and back, knocking many things to the floor. This happening after a strange pop that I could feel more than hear. Trace grabbed his panel, closed his eyes, and began a song. I thought it was a search, but it was a variant I didn't know. Also, I'd slid off the sofa to the floor, so I wasn't as focused on his song as I could have been. Echo ran to the radio, cursing when she got nothing. The lights in the skipper flickered, and she looked around helplessly. We need to know what's going on. Gianni pointed to Trace. Isn't that what he's doing? Echo paused, tilting her head. She reached for her own panel, and then she dropped it and moved to Trace's side. No, she said, taking the panel off his lap. He grabbed her arm and didn't let go. It's bad, he said. They're closer than we are. It's worse than we expected. He shook her off, not seeming to care when she fell back and ended up sitting on the floor. Stamina, she said angrily. Both of you. All of us. Before he kills himself. Trace didn't flinch when she said it. His eyes were closed, and I could feel power pouring out of him. More power than I knew he had within him. It scared me, because I could already feel tremors in his focus. I wanted to ask what he was doing, but I didn't. Instead, I grabbed my panel, and with Gianni pressed against my side, I began to play. I put everything I could into the song, forcing more energy into the notes than I'd ever done. Trace said I played cautiously, but tonight I didn't. I felt G playing the same way, and I thought I heard Echo's tune nearby. Mostly, I focused on my own notes, trying to block away the damage in Trace's focus, as he did whatever he was doing for the villa colony. More than once, I felt tremendous power leave Trace, his focus dwindling as it did. The song was a variation on a jump, and I knew he was saving the villa colony. I didn't know where he put them, but he was doing his best to move them to safety, because that was what Trace did. Gianni's focus also dwindled, because he knew how to help. I didn't know how he was putting so much more power into the stamina song than Echo and I did, but I knew it was true. Somehow the notes on his song were different. He'd changed it to make it more useful to Trace and more deadly to himself. That was when I pulled back. I didn't know more than the most basic healing song, but I knew G and I had helped Trace on Montefollo with no more than a touch. Trace and G and likely Echo were going to give this rescue everything they had, and that meant someone needed to survive to save them right back. That someone was going to be me. I didn't stop playing stamina, but I held back power, and I also listened. I listened to the notes Trace was playing, and I figured out exactly where he released power within the song. His focus was weakening fast, his entire body trembling as he saved citizen after citizen. Part of me was angry because he was choosing their lives over his own, and that meant he didn't know what it would do to us if he died here. I also knew that was unfair. Likely the only thoughts in Trace's mind right now were memories of losing everyone he cared about, those final moments when he failed to rescue his family. It made perfect sense that he would do anything not to repeat that failure. Without releasing the wind, I rose and moved to Trace's side. He sat in a deep, soft chair near the sofa. Then I grew bold and sat on his legs, resting along the edge of his lap, squashed into the chair with him. He didn't release the wind, barely seemed to notice my presence, but I slid one hand beneath his shirt, my other on his face, and I shifted my song, playing what little I knew of a healing song. While he destroyed his focus, I put it back together. Tiny stitches to close the gaping holes he was leaving. I couldn't do enough, probably had no chance of saving him, but I could heal him enough to keep going. Gianni's focus shuddered, and suddenly I was torn. I couldn't touch both of them at once, and G was less damaged, so my touch might help him more. But I had to make a choice. Just like Trace and Echo had once made terrible choices, I made one now, and I leaned closer to Trace and poured more power into my song. "G," I said, opening my eyes. "G, come here. I'll help you. Please." He shook his head, but his eyes opened, and he staggered to his feet and moved toward the chair, falling to his knees with one hand on the chair. He dropped the wind, let the panel fall to the floor, and I felt the loss of power in the room, knew that with him stopping, Trace was in more danger, but G was finished. I took one hand off Trace and rested it on G's face as he leaned against the chair, tired and broken, his focus filled with shame and failure. "No," I said to G, "you didn't fail. A little wisdom here isn't failure." He relaxed on the floor, leaning on the chair, and I fed him healing as I was doing for Trace. It drained me, but I was also using wisdom, and I didn't give more than I had. If I was going to help, truly help, I needed to parse out strength slowly and steadily. I wanted to do more, to be as reckless as Trace, but I knew that wouldn't help. Trace needed to work fast and hard to keep the colony alive, but what I was doing had to be done more slowly, or it wouldn't help at all. "I'm better," G mumbled after a few long moments passed. "Give it all to him." With a nod, I took him at his word and put both hands back on Trace. With a gasp and a groan, Trace let go of the wind, and I felt a wash of relief pass over his focus. He'd done it. I wasn't sure what he'd done, but he was letting go because he was finished, not because he was destroyed. However, he might have been both, because he closed his eyes and relaxed, and I felt him slide under, his focus dimming as he left us, his mind closing off in the hope of healing him while he was gone. Echo dropped her wind with a loud gasp, and she put her hand to her head. "We need Leichnick," I said to her. "Can you get it?" She looked at me like she'd never seen me before, and I realized I was on my own. G still slumped on the floor against the chair. Trace was deeply in a coma. And Echo was battling an epic amount of focal and physical pain. I assumed the citizens of the villa colony were fine, alive. Maybe not fine, maybe without homes, but alive. Everything in Trace's focus said he'd been victorious, except, of course, that he'd lost himself. How could he not know that losing himself turned this victory into defeat for everyone who loved him? And we all loved him. Strange that after a lifetime of feeling alone and left out, I had grown to love 3 strangers enough to put myself in danger for them. I ran to the medbay and grabbed Leichnick and injectors, as much as I could carry, and I started with a large dose for myself. Again, I needed to survive if they were to survive, and that meant a little selfishness. I gave Trace the next dose, as large a dose as I'd seen Echo give him. I wanted to give him more, but I didn't know enough to do it safely. Then G got the next dose, and then Echo the last. She had slid under while I was dosing G, who had slid under just before I got to him. I rounded up blankets to cover them, and I sat on Trace's lap again. With one arm reaching down to Gianni, I closed my eyes, my panel on Trace's chest, and started to play. Right now, I wished someone was around to play a stamina song for me, because I didn't know if I had enough strength left to heal them. I didn't know all the right notes to heal them, not wisely. I vowed that I would force Trace and Echo to find me a teacher as soon as possible. If I had the ability to learn to save my friends, I needed to possess that knowledge. No excuses. So the day began, and I knew it would be a long and exhausting day. And if it worked as I'd hoped, it would be the most useful day of my life. If it didn't work, I doubted I would ever get over it.